Okay, in the first part of the third session in this course, we were discussing how to come up with interesting, worthwhile research questions. And we said that in order to get a handle on that issue, we need to have a sense of the kinds of research that we engage in, the types of research. Especially in the context of science, we do three kinds of research. One of them, we said, is the hypothesis testing model of research, and this corresponds to the conjecture proving. What this means is we make a statement that we think is likely to be true, and then we ask, is this true? What we do to answer this question is, in science, it is hypothesis testing, and in mathematics, it is conjecture proving, that you prove the statement to be true or false. And a great deal of scientific research actually is of this type. The second type of research is that of theory construction. Theory construction and theory validation, theory testing, and so on. A theory in science is the explanation for a set of statements here, the observational generalizations here, which have been shown to be true. So if it is shown to be true, then the next question is, why is it true? Or how? How does that come about? A theory in science is an answer to the question why or the question how. It's an explanation from which the facts that we have established here follow. In mathematics, there is a slight difference. A theory is also a set of statements that give you certain consequences, but we will discuss the distinction between mathematical theories and scientific theories at a later stage. The third type of research is documentation. So we gather a large number of facts, but this may not be preceded by a very pointed, specific question. We'll ignore this for the moment and focus upon these two types of research. So what is it that we need to do to come up with questions, meaningful questions, worthwhile questions, and answerable questions in these two modes of research? Here you ask, is this true or is it false? Yes, no question. Here you ask the question, why or how? Let me begin with this one. To get a handle on this questions in these two types of research, we need to understand the following concepts. One is the concept of traits. The other is the concept of trait values. And the third is the concept of regularities between trait values. What do I mean by that? Trait is also called property or attribute or parameter or axis dimension and variable. There might be a few other terms. They all mean roughly the same thing in this context. So height, human height is a trait. You can also say it's also a property. Height is a property. Height is an attribute, parameter, axis. It's a variable. In statistics, we call it variable. In biology, you call it trait. It's the same thing. It's just that we have so many different terms to express the same thing. Trait value is the value of a property. We use the same thing all over here. So variable and the value of the variable. So if height is a variable, suppose we are talking about me, kpm. One of my attributes is height, like any other human being. What is the value of that variable? Let us say it is 172 centimeters. That's the value of this trait or this variable or this parameter or this attribute. In computer science, we talk about attributes and attribute values. Again, just the terminology, they all mean the same thing. Height is one of the traits. You could also say my age is, say I'm 68 years old. So age is a variable or property or attribute, and this is the value that I have for that on that axis. One way of representing, understanding the relation between these two is to represent this in terms of geometry. So for example, you could represent height as a line beginning with 0 and going on. This is the axis of height. And then where do you locate me? So you say this is 50, this is 100, this is 150, this is 200, and somewhere here is me. So you could say I am a point along this dimension, or I am a point on this line, and this line represents the trait or the attribute or the variable. That's one way of looking at it. And we'll come to this kind of representation again and again in science. So this is represented as a line, and this is represented as a line or an axis, and this is represented as a point on that axis. If you now include age, right? So age, well, you would say 10 years old, 20, 30, and so on, and 60 here, and I will be somewhere here. And so I will now be if you're thinking about a two-dimensional space, I will be a point in that two-dimensional space here, and by locating me here, you know that my height is 172 and my age is 68. This is a two-dimensional space, a two-dimensional trait space. And a particular individual is located as a point in that trait space. We could now include other dimensions. So for example, we could include weight. What is my weight? Maybe about 100 kilos. We could include skin color. My skin color is brownish yellow. The value will be brownish yellow. Eye color. Eye color is a trait, and its value for me is black, but for somebody else it could be blue, it could be green. Number of legs is a trait. Number of legs could be 0, 2, 4, whatever, and for me number of legs would be 2. The value will be 2 for number of legs. Number of fingers will be a trait here, and the value for me would be 10, and so on and so on. So now you get a sense of these two things. Now to go on to the third concept, the regularities between trait values. What we have seen is that an individual, a member of a particular population, let us say KPM is a member of the population of living, the population that we are considering is that of living organisms or species, biological species. There are many species ranging from bacteria to humans, and I just happen to belong to the category of human, and we could write that also here. So KPM, the species is an attribute, and my value on that dimension is human. Now, the question that I would like to raise is, if you know the value of one of these variables, can you infer the value of the other variables? And the answer is yes. So for example, if you know that the value for KPM in the space of species is human, then you know something about the number of legs that you have. Right? Every human has 2 legs, normal humans. The human species has 2 legs in contrast to cows, which have 4 legs. Birds have 2 legs. Insects have 6 legs. Spiders have 8 legs, and so on and so on. So that's what I mean by regularity. By regularity, I mean regularity, predictability of the value of a trait, either within itself or across the values of 2 different traits. So, if you know that I'm human, and also in terms of age, instead of saying age is 68, if you say adult and non-adult, if you also know that I'm adult, what would be my height? Even if you don't see me, you can make an inference about my height. Not exactly, but within a range. So for example, you know that it could not be, my height could not be like 30 centimeters. That is unlikely. It's probably going to be something like, like more than 60. So from here to, let's say, 1 foot to, let's change the centimeter to foot, to about 8 feet, or maybe 9 feet. And this is because if you take a large sample of humans, you find that many of them are within the range of, let's say, 5 feet. But some of them are 4 feet, some of them are 3 feet, and so on, but no adult human less than, let us say, 2 feet, and no adult human more than 5 feet. So this is the space, subspace, within which members of the human species can occur, adult members of the human species. So that's something that you can predict by knowing this value. If you know, these 2 values together, that if you know that I'm an adult human, then you can predict the value, and you can also predict the most likely value, which is the mean somewhere here. You can predict the chances are that I'm not 2 feet, I'm not 8 feet. Chances are that I'm not 3 feet, I'm not 7 feet, because those are rare cases. The most likely case will be somewhere here, which is what you mean by, let's say, mean or median, mode, and so on. The most likely location, the most probable location. That's also predictable. It's a probabilistic prediction, but it is still a prediction. So here's a prediction in terms of a single parameter. Now, let's take two-dimensional space, and suppose you say this is age and this is height. I made a slight flip here, and you measure a large number of humans. Okay, let's say 10,000 humans, beginning with age 1 day. 1 day old baby, 2 people who are 100 years old. That's the age range that you're talking about. And now if you measure the value of 1 day old babies, their height will be somewhere here. If it is like 1 year old, it will be like here, and there will be many such. Okay? And as you proceed about 20, you will be about here, and then it goes on like that. And after a little while, by the time you reach 50 and then you go above 50, the height will come down a little bit. Now, even though I have put this in terms of kind of line-like thing, it's actually a range, because somebody who is like 20 years old, like this is what you're representing. So it's actually a range. That's the height of a 20-year-old. And this is the height of a 19-year-old, and so on and so on. So what you're going to get is something like this. So this is the space that you get. If the trait space, the two-dimensional trait space of age and height is like this is the region in which the human population occurs. So that's a regularity. Regularity meaning there is a constraint saying that these are the kind of outer bounds. You can occur inside this, but not outside that. That's one prediction. But this picture is a statement of the range of heights in the human population. What if you want to predict the most likely height? Then what you do in statistics is to draw a line like this through the center, the mean. Okay? So you say there is a correlation between age and height, and the correlation line is drawn. Correlation is represented as a kind of line. It's not exactly the way I have drawn here. It will sort of go up and then go steady and then come down a little bit. That's the shape of the line. So that shape of the curve gives you a prediction, is a representation of the relation between age and height in the human population. What I've said here is about the correlation between age and height can be generalized to correlation between the values of 2 different traits. A great deal of scientific research is about such correlations. If you know the value of one trait, you can predict the value of another trait. Okay, I'm going to erase this. And I'm going to write what I said just now. If you know the value of trait X, you can infer the value of trait Y. If this is a situation, if you're able to make that inference, this trait is called independent variable, and this one is called dependent variable. So what you're saying, to represent what I've said just now, if the value of X is, let us say, I, then the value of Y is J. This is in the form of if P, then Q in propositional calculus. And this is the independent variable, and this is the dependent variable. I'm trying to connect propositional calculus and statistics. This applies to both qualitative and quantitative aspects of research. In this particular case, the relation between the regularity is a relation between two traits, but it could also be more than that. It could be a relation among 3 or 4 traits. So let me take an example. If you know that my skin color, the value of skin color is, let's say, yellowish brown, or let's say, let's take a case of dark brown. What is the chance that my eye color or this person's eye color is blue? Very low. The most probable value of eye color will be black. But there could be some rare cases of blue or green. What about hair color? The hair color also is likely to be black, not yellow, not red, and so on. Those are unlikely. Now, what if you combine these two? No, let me, yeah. If you combine skin color is dark brown, eye color is black, it is almost certain that the hair color is black, not yellow. Or if skin color is dark and hair color is black, the probability of eye color being black increases. So now what you have is a relation among 3 variables. So what you have here is a 3-dimensional space. And in the previous picture, there are many traits for a human being. So eye color, hair color, number of teeth, number of fingers, number of toes, presence of heart, number of heart, exactly 1 for adult humans. The location of the heart, slightly to the left, slightly to the right. Presence or absence of lungs, presence or absence of blood, presence or absence of brain, etc., etc. So what you have is a situation in which the species, biological organisms exist in a multi-dimensional trait space. In statistical graphs, you typically represent these things in a 2-dimensional space, but we need to have a mental picture of multi-dimensional trait space. So you can represent 2 dimensions like that, and you can represent 1 more dimension like this, but on a blackboard, green board, you can't do more than that. But imagine that there are many such, like hundreds and thousands of these traits. And the challenge that the theory of biology faces is that of defining the possible regions or the regions in which biological organism can exist. What does that mean? Let's take a couple of examples. Let's take beak as a variable. And you can say there are 2 possible values for beak. Yes, the organism or the species has beak, and no, the organism doesn't have beak. So we could represent this as plus. Yes means plus, plus means yes, and minus means no. Okay, now let's take legs. If you know that an organism has beak, can you infer whether or not the organism has legs? Again, yes or no. So bacteria, for example, doesn't have legs. Oak trees do not have legs. worms don't have legs, but that is not the case if you have beak. So you take this one. So if this, then this. Not only that you know that this organism has legs, but its value of number of legs is 2. So from here you can predict this information. That's a regularity, that's a law. A law that expresses the relation between values of traits. Let me give you another way of looking at this. So you can say beak is 1 and the value could be plus or minus. And on this side you have legs, number of legs. Okay, number of legs could be number of legs could be 0, it could be 2, it could be 4, it could be 6, it could be 8, and so on and so on. And now you look at the possibilities. If there were no constraints, that is to say, if the probabilities, all these probabilities are equally, all these possibilities are equally probable, then it is random. But that is not the case. We know that if beak is plus, this is not. But beak is minus, yes. If beak is plus, yes, here, but not here. What that means is, if you have a beak, then you have 2 legs. It is not the case that you have, if the beak is minus, this is also possible. Humans don't have beak, and they have 2 legs. If your beak is plus, you don't have 4 legs, but if it is minus, you can. If the beak is plus, you don't have 6 legs, but this is possible. This is not possible, this is possible. So what you have here is, you have these gaps. Those spaces are ruled out. That's what I mean by saying, these are the possible subspaces in which an organism can occur. Here is one way of looking at it. Another example, let's take prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So okay. You can also take multicellular. These are the trait values, and unicellular. These are the values along one dimension, values along another dimension. Now you try to combine them. Okay, is it possible to have eukaryotic multicellular? Yes. Can you have eukaryotic unicellular? Yes. Can you have prokaryotic unicellular? Yes. Bacteria. But can you have prokaryotic multicellular? No. So that is also a gap in the possible distribution, possible combinations of trait values. That also you can write, that relation also you can write as a law like this: if P then Q is written as if multicellular then prokaryotic. What that means is, I'm sorry, if multicellular then eukaryotic. There are no organisms which are multicellular and do not have any eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic meaning cells with cell nuclei. These are what I mean by laws of structure, laws of trait value combinations. Now, the examples that I've given you might strike you as somewhat strange because people don't refer to these regularities as laws, but I'm extending the notion law to refer to qualitative laws of this kind as well. Typically, when you hear the word law in science, you think of quantitative laws, but these are not quantitative, these are qualitative. Let me now give you another example of a law that is qualitative in nature. Galileo was experimenting on the period of a pendulum. Period is a trait or a variable, and its values can range from, let us say, 0 point some small period to large period. So it can have many values, and these are gradient values. These are values that can be represented in rational numbers, as opposed to these values that we have been discussing, which are not representable in rational numbers. They are representable as integers or as plus and minus. So that's why I said these are qualitative. Period, on the other hand, like height, is a quantitative variable. And he asked the question, can you predict period from something else? Can you predict the period of a pendulum from the weight of the pendulum? No. From the color of the pendulum? No. From the material of the pendulum, like metal versus wood? No. There are many traits that give you no information about the period, but when you look at the length of a pendulum, again, a quantitative variable, then you have a correlation between the two. As the period of the pendulum, as the length of the pendulum increases, the period also increases. That's a correlation. A correlation that allows you to predict, to infer the value of period from the value of length. And Galileo was able to specify this correlation not in qualitative terms. So if you were to state this in qualitative terms, it will look like when period increases, when the length increases, period also increases. This is the broad statement, qualitative statement. So from this you know that if there are two pendulums, one of them has greater length than the other, then that also has greater period than the other. But you cannot predict, if given a pendulum with some n length, you cannot predict its period. To do that, you have to state it in quantitative terms, which is what Galileo did. Likewise, Galileo was able to find a correlation between the time during which an object falls and its velocity. This is called the law of the falling bodies, which you must have learned in high school. That law of the falling bodies expresses a correlation between the value of the trait of time and the trait of velocity in quantitative terms. So, what I'm describing is a certain way of looking at nature by asking the question, can I find correlations between values? Can I predict one value on the basis of some other, the value of some other trait? This is a staple form of research in scientific inquiry. And what you do in that mode of research is identify the traits and possible trait values so that you can construct the space of trait values. And then within that space, you ask the question, what are the subspaces within which the actual entities can occur? If you ask that question, and if you look for an answer, what you're going to get is a scientific law. the scientific law that applies in physical sciences, in biological sciences, and in human sciences. So let me go back to the three types of research that we talked about earlier. Hypothesis testing and conjecture proving. Let me briefly say something about this. Conjecture proving. Let's take a mathematical object such as a circle. Circle has two properties. One property is the circumference. That's a continuous variable, gradient variable. It also has diameter. That's also continuous variable. So there are two traits here. Is there a correlation between these two, the values of these two traits? Yes, you already know the law, and the law is expressed as circumference is equal to pi times the diameter. That's how the law is written. This law relating diameter and circumference is the same form as the law that relates period and length. As this increases, this increases. As this increases, this increases. These are all correlations, but in mathematics you don't talk about correlations. The word is not used, but it's the same thing. It's a relation between variables, systematic relation, regularity holding between the values of two or three different variables. So this is one type of research. And as I said, correlation is one type of relation between variables. Causation is another type. So here you say X correlates with Y. And you may also attribute independent variable versus dependent variable. So what that means is if you know the value of X, you can predict the value of Y. That's simply a logical relation. Causation is not just a logical relation. X causes Y. These two are two different kinds of regularities. We'll come back to the distinction between them later, but it's very important to remember that correlation does not mean causation. Why I'm saying that, you'll figure out later. The second type is theory. So having established a correlation or a causation, we need to know why that is true or how that is true. So for example, you discover that there is a correlation between period and length, there is a correlation between time and velocity, and then you want to know why. And the answer is given by Newton's theory. So Newton explains the correlations that Galileo observed. So Galileo's research comes here, Newton's research comes here. Likewise, you observe a correlation between time and temperature. When you measure temperature at different intervals of time, let us say you measure temperature every hour in a particular region. And then you find that the temperature in the morning, you measure temperature in the morning, it gradually goes up and then it comes down at night and then goes up again the next day and comes back. So this wave, this is the period or the cycle. And what I've drawn here is a daily cycle of temperature. Likewise, there is also a yearly cycle. The temperature goes up. If you measure the mean temperature of days and you measure it for over several years, you find that the temperature goes up and reaches a peak during a certain time of the year that we call summer, comes down and reaches a valley that we call winter and goes up. And this is a yearly cycle, not a daily cycle. So there are two cycles of temperature on the Earth. Now you ask the question, why does that correlation exist? What is the explanation for this correlation? Again, the question why? And the answer for that is the heliocentric theory. You observe, as I stated earlier, you observe that there is a correlation between skin color, hair color, and eye color. And you ask the question, why does that correlation exist? You will have to look at the molecular level and how of DNA, of RNA, of proteins, and so on, and gradually how the information at the DNA level in development translates into these trait values such as blue eyes, green eyes, dark skin, brown skin, etc. That's the explanation. The explanation comes from developmental biology. In some cases, the explanation may come from evolutionary biology. You found this relation between beak and legs, and you can ask the question, why is it that species which have beaks have exactly 2 legs? Well, again, you can construct a theory in terms of development biology. Such a theory does not exist yet. It will be for you to figure out, flesh out theories of this kind that explain biological laws of the kind that I described. But the explanation will come from developmental biology. Given certain kinds of configurations at molecular structure, given certain kinds of constraints, then you should get these results. This is how you specify the constraints on trait combinations. Let me write that down. Constraints on trait combinations. Strictly speaking, I should be saying constraints on the combinations of trait values. What are the ways in which different values can be combined? And certain combinations are not possible, certain other combinations are possible, certain combinations are more probable than the others. So we are talking about constraints on trait space. Okay. If you try to identify these constraints, the laws articulate the possible spaces and the most probable spaces within that totality of space. I should be saying the laws express the subspaces, capture the subspaces where organism can exist, and most likely subspaces where organisms can exist. Here is a very productive way of doing correlational biology, causal biology, and theoretical biology. And all of these come from an understanding of 3 things: trait value, and regularities, and the regularities expressed as laws. It's a very simple strategy to engage in research. Here is something, especially in biology, and also actually in human sciences, in many human sciences, this approach hasn't been tried out in a significant way. So here is an area for you, an untrodden area for you to start doing research. And because it is an untrodden area, there isn't very much crowding. You can do a great deal of research and acquire visibility fairly soon. So you can do even a master's thesis and get high visibility, because this is something that very few people have actually tried. We'll come to the other kinds of questions in the next class session.